All right, Parsha 101, one take, Parshas Emor. The name of this week's Torah portion comes from the beginning of the Torah portion. V'yamar Hashem el Moshe, Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aaron. Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the Kohanim, speak to the priests, the children of Aaron. And there's a lot going on in this week's Torah portion, so we'll try to move quickly. The beginning of it, as we just saw, talks about rules for the Kohanim. The Kohanim has a general idea. The Jewish people are holy people. We've seen that a lot past couple of portions. You're holy, you have to be holy unto me, etc., etc. Among all the holy, now we have an elevated holy, and that's the Kohanim, because they're the ones who serve in the Beis Hamikdash. There's a higher standard that's being held for them. So now, as a general thing, it also says have the elders teach the youngers, right? This is the way education should go. You have the older people teaching the younger people and bringing them in. So the rules for the Kohanim are that they are not allowed to ritually defile themselves with a corpse. So if there's a dead body somewhere, they got to get out. They can only go, there's even rules today about Kohanim going into cemeteries and things like that. And there's only 7 exceptions for funerals that they can attend. And that's for a wife, a mother, a father, a son, a daughter, a brother, and a sister who hasn't been married yet. Because when she's married, she's considered part of the other family. And the only exception, if there's no one else around to bury a body, they got to do that. But otherwise, they're not allowed to be within contact with that. During the mourning period, for these relatives, they are not allowed to be officiating in the Beis Hamikdash. Then there's also certain things that people do in mourning, like creating this bald spot on their head, or there's no friar Cohen, I guess. Creating this bald spot on their head, or like cutting the beard, or cutting in the flesh, cutting themselves. In general, it's not allowed, but these things that were like considered mourning rituals, they're not allowed to do that. And repeats, they have to be extra holy. It says they should be holy for you, right? Which is why Kohanim go first for Torah reading. Kohanim are given extra honors. It's also, even today, that you're not supposed to like directly ask a Kohen to do something for you. Like, oh, hey, pick that up or something like that. You gotta find, like, oh man, look at what's on the floor over here. The Kohen could pick it up, but you're not supposed to like command a Kohen to do things. This is part of all this. And then also talks about who a Kohen's allowed to marry. That a Kohen is not allowed to marry specifically someone who's been divorced, someone who may have slept around with people or anything like that. Even if it's not their current behavior, a Kohen's not allowed to marry them. And if they do, then they're, you say, demoted from the status of Kohen. And their children also are born demoted, I guess you could say. Now, it also talks about, interestingly, a Kohen's daughter, if, God forbid, or whatever, she's convicted of adultery, the punishment for her is much stricter, because you've disgraced your whole family and where you're coming from. You should have been, you got to be better than this. You got to be more than this. And so usually the punishment for adultery is that the man and the woman, the punishment is strangulation. But for the Kohen's daughter, the punishment is by fire. Then it talks about the Kohen Gadol, right? So you already have the holy people, you got the extra holy within the holy people, and you got the extra holy among the holy of the holy people. And it talks about the rules for the mourning of the Kohen Gadol. There's no exceptions for him attending funerals. He's not allowed to he doesn't rip his garments in mourning. He's not allowed to let his hair go uncut for 30 days, for more than 30 days straight. Again, he can't go near into a house where there's a corpse or a dead body, because he's got to be absolutely pure for his service. Now, there is one exception, which, as mentioned before, which makes that if there's nobody around to bury the body, right? So if he's in the middle of nowhere, comes across a corpse, he's commanded to ritually defile himself for that corpse. And there's a Chassidic metaphor for this, that sometimes you might see someone who seems to be spiritually dead or spiritually like a corpse, and even a Kohen Gadol, whoever you are, wherever you are, you got to get out there and give him life. You got to revive him. Then it talks about who a Kohen Gadol is allowed to marry. He must marry a virgin, and she could be from any of the tribes, but specifically someone who is a virgin he has to marry, and anybody else is not allowed to marry. Not a widow, not a divorcee, a bunch of other people, not allowed to marry them. Then it talks about Kohanim that have bodily defects. But they call it bodily defects, but it's kind of like a catch-all category. And these, if a Kohen has one of these conditions, we'll got bodily conditions. If he's got any of these conditions, then he's suspended from service. Some of them that he can heal from, so when he heals, then he's allowed to serve again. And then some of them he is disqualified from, he can't serve at all. But he still is, even like this, he's still allowed to eat from the Kohen's portion of a sacrifice. And it's just limited by where he's allowed to go, but aside from that, So what are these? For example, if a Kohen is blind, if he's lame, there's this thing about a sunken nose. If he's got mismatched limbs, so like one arm is like way longer than the other or something like that. If he has a broken leg or a broken arm, which of course he can heal from. There's something about like overly large eyebrows or something. Cataract, something with like this commingling of eye colors or something. Dry boils, oozing boils, or if his reproductive organs have been crushed. These disqualify him from service. After that, it talks about the consecrated foods, like the foods that a Kohen, like certain sacrifices, there were certain parts of it, like this meat is reserved for the Kohen, or certain breads, or different foods like that, but the Kohen's allowed to eat. So if a Kohen is ritually defiled, he's not allowed to eat from the carbon or this kares. We have a lot of this. It's the same thing that for a regular Jewish person, right? It's not supposed to eat any of the holy foods of a carbon or anything like that if they're ritually defiled, right? So the same thing for the Kohen. And it lists a lot of, it's all the same reasons, mainly for if he comes in contact with the carcass of one of the 8 creepy crawlies, if he touches someone who's been ritually defiled, someone with tsaras or something, if he has tsaras. There's the truma, which is a certain kind of, it's not tithing, but it's a type of tithing that's given to the Kohen. So it's all these things about any of the foods that are considered the holy foods, these foods that are like consecrated foods. He can't eat them if he's ritually defiled. And for all of these things, he can become, as soon as he goes to mikvah and waits till evening or whatever, then usually he can have it again or right by the next day. And then it also talks about someone who's not a Kohen is not allowed to eat of these foods, but usually the Kohen's wife and children, they are allowed to partake of these, unless one of his daughters is married out, then they can't eat of it. And if there is a non-Kohen who eats from these foods, they have to pay back the portion plus another fifth to kind of compensate for that. Okay, after that now it moves on to sacrifices, which also, sacrifices are not allowed to have any blemishes or bodily defects to them. So it's all the cattle. Okay, there's the ox and the goat and the sheep or anything like that, no blemishes. It couldn't have had one like at the time of consecration, or if it happened afterwards and there's the procedure for that one's now, it's been designated, but I have to give another animal for it. This actually, well, not to get into it here, this is part of the problem of what occurred by the destruction of the second base of Mikdash. That the guy had gone to the Roman emperor to say, watch, the Jews aren't going to offer up your sacrifice. And of course, the emperor sent a beautiful animal to be sacrificed, but the guy blemished it, basically. He nicked it. And there was a whole argument among the sages of, should we offer up the sacrifice because this could be very bad for everyone, or should we not because it's not allowed? And that's basically what led to everything. Anyway, back to this. So then there's the different descriptions about what's considered blemished animal. Also, if it's blind, or if it's got broken bones, split eyelid or lip, or with the boils again and crushed reproductive organs and all this kind of stuff. But it also adds in here, by the way, you're not supposed to maim animals. It's a prohibition to maim an animal. There's prohibition against castrating an animal, different things like that. And it says these laws for the animal, it applies to Jews, carbon, or if like a non-Jew wants to bring a sacrifice and then a Jew will offer it on their behalf, same thing, it has to be this perfect animal, which kind of like we just described. Then it says that an ox, a sheep, or a goat, if it's a baby, then it has to stay with its mother for 7 days, and it's not allowed to be sacrificed until the 8th day, and a mother and the young cannot be sacrificed on the same day. They kind of also give a Chassidic insight with that the animals represent their emotions, and the mother represents the intellect. So if you got a new emotion coming in, you got to let it sit in the intellect before you unleash it. Okay, some other things about sacrifices here. Then we have the commandment here about how you shouldn't desecrate my name, God's name, of course. Don't desecrate my name. This is what's explained by the commentaries. Is they say the mitzvah of Mesiras Nefesh, of someone giving up their life to sanctify God's name. General idea is that there's the 3 mitzvahs that a person try to be killed, then transgress. That's idolatry, any of the forbidden relationships. Usually it's categorized as adultery, but it's any of the forbidden relationships, and murder. So someone's like, murder someone, or I'm going to kill you, then it's like Mesiras Nefesh. There's also the idea of if there's public religious suppression, even if it's not for any of those things, but if it's going to be there's a public display of religious suppression, a person should give up their life for that. and also if there's some sort of national religious suppression going on. Communism would be a good example of that. So then a person should rather give up their life than transgress. It also talks about as a general idea that anything that's going to discredit the Torah or give a bad name to Judaism, and not as far as, oh, people don't agree with this mitzvah, or whatever, but this is the way a Jew behaves as a general idea. That's something for people to bear in mind, of stay very much away from that, because it's not going to be a credit to the Torah, and that's considered a desecration. Or any acts that's going to dignify the Torah, of like, wow, look, this is how a Jewish person behaves, is considered a sanctification of God's name. Okay, now the Torah portion shifts over to Shabbos and Yom Kippur. As a general idea, like, these are my appointed holy days, right? As a general idea, as we've spoken about before, there have to be witnesses to say when the new month is, and they can figure out that whatever, when the holidays will fall out. But in the 4th century, Hillel II, because everything had changed, and the destruction of the first base of Mikdash, second base of Mikdash, the population had dwindled, and lots of not good stuff going on, and he realized this commandment of the way we used to have the new month, it's not going to work anymore. So he set up a permanent fixed calendar, and this is the calendar, the cycle of it that goes until today, the way he set up the cycle of it. And that's basically, there's like a 19-year cycle, and 7 out of those 19 years end up being leap years. So it's not every 4 years, it depends on how the cycle works out. This year was a leap year. Now, it's very specific about how you're not supposed to do any work. Shabbos is every 7th day, etc., etc. The holidays are usually has the quarter points, but now we know we follow the calendar, and those are all set dates. There is a distinction about when it speaks about don't work on Shabbos and don't work on Yom Kippur. The language, it says don't work, but the phrasing is a little bit different, because we know on Yom Kippur, there are certain things that are allowed that are not allowed on Shabbos. Shabbos is anything that were done for building the Mishkan, what we call the 39 melachos. And on Yom Kippur, certain things are allowed, like you could light a fire from an existing flame, right? Or cooking, baking, these sort of things. Anything with food prep is allowed on Yom Kippur, even though it's not allowed on Shabbos. And okay, now it's going to go through the main holidays. So we have Pesach, right? The afternoon of the 14th of the first month is when the Karban Pesach goes, and the 15th is a holiday for you, right? You got to treat it like a holiday, which commentators say you got to wear nice clothes, you got to have special food, you got to have certain prayers to say. There's a lot of there's additional offerings, usually a lot of additional communal offerings that are brought on each of these holidays, etc., etc., etc. Then it talks about how on the second day of Pesach, there's going to be an Omer barley sacrifice. And then there's also this lamb that's brought, etc., etc. We're not going to get into all of it here. But basically, you can't partake of any of the new harvest until certain sacrifices have been brought. So one of them is this Omer barley sacrifice. And the next one's going to come on Shavuos. It's going to be a wheat sacrifice. Then it says from the night of the 15th, which is already the 16th, you're going to count 7 complete weeks. So a full 49 days, the 50th day is Shavuos. Which is also why, just fun fact, Shavuos is one Jewish holiday that we don't bring in early. The other, like Shabbat, you could start if it's in the summertime. You have a certain window of how early you could bring in Shabbat. According to where you live, there's calculations that are made for the time frames for that. Other holidays, you could bring it in early. Shavuos, you can't, because it has to be 49 complete days. Shavuos can only start on the 50th. And then especially because the Northern Hemisphere, Shavuos is usually closer to summertime. It get pretty late in certain areas, but it's straight from the Torah, all of this. Now it's also general like Chassidic concept, this whole counting thing. We don't count down to the giving of the Torah, but we're counting up to the giving of the Torah, right? It's not 50, 49, 48. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because as a general idea, of course, all of our days should be counted days, and there should be an accounting for the day. We should know that we've accomplished. We should know that we've done much. And also because we want to make sure that every day has been better than the one before, right? We want to add more to the days and see what more we can do every day. Okay, and then it goes through how on Shavuos, there's going to be this grain offering, which is a wheat offering, which is going to be from the new harvest. And then everyone can have, can partake now the grains of the new harvest. Well, before that, but it's okay, fine. And then also, it's interesting that there's 2 loaves of bread that are brought with this, that are brought of this offering, and this is one of the only times that there's leavened bread brought as a carbon, because usually all the breads in the base of Mikdash were not leavened. This is one of the only times that it's actually leavened bread that's brought. And then it gives amounts for it, and then it talks about the additional 7 one-year lambs and a bull and 2 rams. That's the oil offering, and then you got a male goat as a chatas, a sin offering, and then 2 lambs as a peace offering, etc., etc. Now it goes back again, and it mentions what's called peh and leket. Peh is the corner of the field that's supposed to remain unharvested, and that's left for the poor people and converts. Again, specifically converts, because when the land was divided, there was not inheritance to them to have a specific portion of land. And when we talk about agrarian societies, right, people live off the produce of the land. So you got to leave it. You're not allowed to touch it anyway. Oh, here, let me help you harvest it. You just got to, that's the pay, and you walk away from it. And then there's leket, which are the gleanings. And when those are left over, like left out, you're not allowed to collect them. Those are for other people to gather. This is how the people took care of each other. Then it moves into all the other holidays. Now we're at the month of Tishrei now. And it talks about the 1st or the 10th month is supposed to be a remembrance of shofar blasts, right? Which is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day that Adam was created. The man was created on this day. Then it talks about how the 10th of the 10th is supposed to be a day of atonement. You got to afflict yourselves. And those who don't afflict themselves, so God, someone eating, God forbid, on Yom Kippur, it's kares. It's a severe, it's excision. It's a very severe penalty. Not penalty, punishment, repercussion that occurs. Also, anybody who works, he says they're going to be lost. God says anyone who works on Yom Kippur, they're going to be lost from among the people, as in it could lead to premature death, God forbid, or something like that. This is an eternal rule for all time, that Yom Kippur is supposed to be this day. It has to be a complete day of rest. It starts on the evening of the 9th, right? And it goes through the 10th day. And then it talks about on the 15th of the 10th month, it's going to be Sukkot. Again, none of the work, and there's going to be extra offerings. The first day is going to be a holy day. You got 7 days. And then on the 8th day is another holy day. Shmini Atzeres, we call it. It just has a general idea. We have the Shalosh Regalim, which are the 3 festivals that used to go up to the Beis HaMikdash. So that's Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And those 3 revolve around different parts of agriculture, right? So it's the planting season, the harvest season, and the ingathering season, right? Because the acknowledgement of, all of our sustenance is coming from God. It's also, these are holidays, Pesach and Sukkot celebrate the Exodus, and Shavuos is obviously what the Exodus was all about, the lead up to the giving of the Torah in Har Sinai. There's also an interesting thing that it compares these 3 holidays to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, these are the days of awe, right? That's what it's also all about, fear and the days of awe. These other holidays are supposed to be holidays that are rooted in love and joy and celebration. Now here it talks about the 4 species, right? The fruit of the citron, which we call it the esrog. That's like, it says that the bark is supposed to taste, like the flavor of the fruit is going to be in the bark. Which, fun fact, going back to the original, when the world was originally created, it was supposed to be that way. The bark of trees, it was supposed to taste like the fruits. But then the trees were like, no, we're not going to do that. People are just going to eat us. Okay, it's kind of a paraphrase of what occurred. But anyways, you got to have basically what we call the esrog now, the date palm frond, which is a lulav. You have to have 3 myrtle branches and 2 willow branches, hadassah and arevas. You got to sit in the hut. The hut represents the clouds of glory that surrounded the Jewish people and protected them, and this is an eternal rule, etc. Now the Torah portion switches gears, and we talk about the kindling of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. The menorah is lit with shemen zayisach, pure olive oil, and it's the olive oil that's squeezed from like the first stages of the crushing, the processing of the oil. When they originally inaugurated the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, it had to be like uber pure oil. From then on, it still had to be super pure oil, but it wasn't as strict, but still pretty strict. And then it talks about how it's got to be lit every evening, and it's got to burn until morning. And first you got to clean it out, and then you light it, etc. And it gives about, each cup has to have about half a log of oil, which is about 172 milliliters or 5.8 ounces. That was considered long enough to burn. Summer, even the winter nights. Then it moves to the lechem apanim, which we call the showbread. That one on the shulchan, the table. If you remember the way we described it, they kind of had this like kind of inverted, like an upside down chav kind of look, this kind of boxy Tetris shape to them. And it's, 2/10 of an eighth of fine flour, each of these. It's going to be 12 loaves and 2 stacks of 6. And next to each of them, each stack, there's going to be this spoon of frankincense. And it was actually a miracle that occurred because the loaves stayed fresh from one week to the other. So they would bake them on Fridays, put them in on Shabbos, Shabbos, the old loaves were taken out, and the Kohanim would eat them. They have to eat them within the temple precincts, I guess you could say, and they were as if they had just come out of the oven. Now the Torah switches to the story about the son of the Israelite woman. And who is the son of the Israelite woman? The nickname that's given is Shlomis Bas Dibri. And she's called that because she was considered someone who talked excessively to the point where she drew attention to herself. If you remember going all the way back, as a general thing, the Torah gives much praise to the Jewish women that none of them ever messed around with any of the Egyptian men. There's a whole thing of how they stayed chaste and pure and all that sort of stuff. There was one woman, however, a whole story happened where Egyptian taskmaster got into her bed and whatever. So there was a son born of it. And this son now, he wanted to set up camp. We didn't get into the division of the camp yet of which tribes went where, so the story's skipping around a little bit. The Parsha is, but he wanted to set up camp with his mother's tribe, which is the tribe of Dan. And there was a fight, like, this is not your place. The tribe goes according to the father, not according to the mother. So, well, his father wasn't Jewish, so he has no tribe. Well, if you have no tribe, you have to camp outside, which is kind of outside the clouds of glory, where the mixed multitudes would camp. You got to go there, and he didn't want to go there. So they come up to Moshe and they said, "What do we do with him?" Okay, the decision's made. He's not allowed to camp with the tribe of Dan, and he gets very upset, very angry, to the extent that he curses God, using God's name. He curses God. Oh well, it's a very big offense. You're not allowed to curse God's name. Now, what are we supposed to do with him? Everybody knew, like, you're not supposed to do this, but we haven't yet gotten to the point of the Torah is very explicitly stated, "Thou shalt not curse my name." But everyone knew you're not supposed to do that. So they did. They put him in detention. And as a general thing, Torah does not specifically have like rules for imprisonment because it's considered counterproductive, right? People, you got to get stuff done. You got to be doing stuff, and you can't rectify the wrong that you've done if you're just locked up. Now, if you're in wherever country you live, you got to follow the laws of the land. But as a general idea, punishment or repercussions, consequences occurred immediately. There was capital punishment that could occur. That's when the Torah decides you've crossed this line. That's it. But as a general idea, there's no like specific lockdown. There's only till we're gonna decide what's gonna happen. So they put him in lockdown, and then they go, okay. So now Moshe has to go, okay, what do we do with him now? So technically, it's gonna be a capital offense. So God's like, okay, we're going to work this capital offense a little bit differently, but it's going to happen, okay? Usually, if someone curses God's name, someone uses God's name, and they curse God's name, then the stoning is what occurs. And what happens with the stoning is that they push a person off a height that's double their own height, and then if they live, the witnesses, people who are witness to this, throw stones at them. And if they're still alive after that somehow, then everybody throws stones at them until they're dead. So very, wonderful. Now, so what he said, so now a big thing also with anytime there's capital offense in Judaism, it almost always comes with a person has to be warned first and they have to be witness having committed the crime. You can't just arbitrarily accuse people of things. That's like, oh, it's just so bad, so whatever. There has to be warnings and there have to be witnesses. That thou shalt not don't do these things. Okay, now someone witnessed this being done. Okay, now you could bring them up on capital charges. So, okay, what's going to happen is that everybody who saw, who witnessed this cursing, all of them together will throw one stone together. They'll push him off, they'll throw the one stone together, and then if he still lives, then whatever. Basically, what ended up happening is that they did, and he ended up dying, basically, from the stoning. Now, it does say, Hashem does warn that, and this is a general thing, that if a person gets away with a capital offense, or in here, if a person wasn't warned or whatever, they still curse God's name, God's like, don't worry, I'm going to take care of them. Okay, the punishment is kari's excision for it. And then don't use the divine name, don't curse God's name. And then actually, it adds in, the Parsha now, wrapping up, adds in a few more things. Like, if a person strikes another person and kills them, there's a death sentence for that. If a person strikes an animal and kills the animal, then he's liable for payment. He's got to pay for that animal. If a person strikes an animal and injures the animal, he's got to pay for that. If someone injures someone else, they're liable for payment, right? That's the eye in place of an eye, a tooth in place of a tooth kind of thing, right? It's not literal. It means that there's monetary compensation with that. It does say that someone who injures their parent is liable for the death penalty. Not like, oops, I bumped into, right? The deliberate harm. Someone who causes deliberate harm. to the parent. And then Parsha tells us these laws are applicable to everybody, those who are native to the Jewish tribe, those who come into the Jewish tribe. Same laws apply to everybody. And Moshe relayed all that God had commanded, and so it was. And that's this week's Parsha.